Surprisingly, Iran became one of the few genuine allies of Russia in this conflict. So far, it is the only country to supply Russia with weapons, especially drones. Others have refrained from providing weaponry and other support, even though before the special operation Russia seemed to have more close allies. In this video, we will discuss why Iran supports Russia. First of all, we should talk about the history of relations between these countries. Iran and Russia always had a rather complicated and ambiguous relationship. Back in the day, there were a couple of conflicts, but the countries didn't proclaim each other enemies. During the Russian Civil War, Russia attempted to establish a Persian Socialist Soviet Republic on Iranian territory, but it ultimately failed. In peaceful times, the countries established close economic relations. But during the Eastern Front of the Second World War, Soviet-British forces invaded Iran and overthrew the acting Shah, Reza Pahlavi. Despite its formal neutrality, the Allies believed that the Shah's regime favored Germany, and they feared the Iranian oil would fall into the hands of Nazis, which they desperately needed. As a result, part of Iran became occupied. All oil fields ended up under British-Soviet control. Interestingly, even after the war ended, Stalin refused to withdraw Soviet troops from Iran and even created a proxy Democratic Republic of Azerbaijan on the territory where actual Azerbaijanis lived. Further plans included the annexation of territories. However, under American pressure, the Soviets were forced out of Iran. Before the 1979 Islamic Revolution, relations were rather tenuous. Iran was leaning towards the pro-Western bloc, unlike the Arab countries, which displeased the Soviet Union. When the Islamic Revolution began, Soviet leaders welcomed it and immediately established relations, but they soon took a sharp turn for the worse. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and supported Iraq in their war with Iran. In response, Islamists were inciting the Muslim peoples of the Soviet Union to revolt. Relations were getting back to normal after Perestroika, and in the 2000s the countries became closer, largely driven by the anti-American agenda. So now let's get to the main point and look at the reasons why Iran supports Russia in the Ukrainian conflict. The first reason is the anti-American narrative and Iran's disdain towards the West. The anti-American stance has been part of Iran's ideology largely due to the support of Israel and the Saudis since the Islamic Revolution. The modern Iranian Republic historically has viewed the West as its enemy, and with its growing influence in the Middle East and the impact of sanctions on Iran, this has become even more relevant. Russia and Iran were brought closer together under the banner of anti-Americanism. In reality, though, these countries don't have anything in common. Iran also views the conflict in Ukraine as a hybrid war with the West, because of its support for Ukraine and weapon shipments. So the Iranian authorities decided to retaliate by helping Russia. Iran wants to be an accomplice in the destruction of the American-centric world, so it supplies its drones to the Russian army. The second reason is the search for allies and isolation. The rapprochement between Iran and Russia occurred as both countries moved further away from the United States and the Western Bloc. Iran has actually been isolated from the world since the 80s. Over the years, this situation kept going back and forth. But Iran has been effectively cut off from Western technology and for decades has had no obvious allies in the world. Russia managed to maintain favorable relations with the West for a long time, but the first major rift occurred in 2014, resulting in rapprochement with Iran. Currently, Iran stands out as one of the few allies that provides real support to Russia. No other country extends that kind of assistance except Belarus, which has lost its identity. Even post-Soviet countries prefer to remain neutral in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Iran is counting on this to help it increase its influence in the Middle East, where Russia, due to its influence on Assad, plays a significant role, and Iran can wage war with its main enemy, Israel, from the territory of Syria. As an ally, Russia has other advantages. For example, the largest nuclear shield and a privileged position in world organizations. Russia is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, with veto power. Iran probably hopes that if push comes to shove, Russia will oppose anti-Iranian resolutions. So the Ukrainian conflict served as the perfect pretext to bring Russia closer to Iran, and the latter is extremely pleased and willing to help however it can. The third reason is more pragmatic. Iran sells its drones at a profit, tests them, and advertises them. Iran's economy is struggling, so trade with Russia can bring considerable income, even though it is difficult to sell weapons directly to Russia because of imposed sanctions. There is no concrete information about how and at what prices Iran sells its weapons, but the arms business can be quite lucrative. Considering that literally no one else wants to sell weapons to Russia, Iran can essentially establish a monopoly. Moreover, Israel and the US fear that in addition to funding, Iran may be receiving more valuable assets from Russia, like technology to make nuclear weapons. There is no confirmed data on this, but we know very little about the transactions themselves. From a practical point of view, this is an opportunity to test Iranian weapons in large-scale combat situations and against NATO equipment. The Ukrainian conflict has effectively turned into a testing ground for advanced weaponry, which the Iranian authorities have also decided to take advantage of. This allows them to assess the effectiveness of their weapons and to upgrade them. Moreover, these drones are being tested against an army that largely uses Western technology, so this is perfect for Iran. Their biggest rivals have similar or identical systems. Israel and Saudi Arabia are largely armed with American weapons. Also, the use of Iranian drones and the demonstration of their effectiveness is good publicity for the Iranian military-industrial complex, which can increase the export of their weapons, although it is limited. Iranian drones have proven to be quite effective, and they have been praised by Western analysts. The drones are fairly cheap, capable of traveling 1,000 kilometers and accurately striking their targets, so Iran got what it wanted. It's worth noting that this kind of advertising on the Ukrainian side is done by the Bayraktar company, which also produced drones. The Ukrainian conflict and the war in Karabakh made them quite popular and boosted their sales. Funnily enough, initially Iran denied that such a deal was made. They said that no weapons were sold to Russia and tried advocating for a quick and peaceful resolution. However, the truth came out when Iranian drones were used in attacks on Ukrainian targets. The Iranian authorities were forced to admit that they were supplying drones to Russia, but they claimed it happened before the conflict, which is doubtful. Iran is trying to take a neutral stance, hoping that in the future it can still break free from sanctions, and supports the territorial integrity narrative, fearing separatism in its own lands. We should mention an alternative path that Iran could have taken when the Ukrainian conflict broke out, which unfortunately was ignored by its regime. Many Western experts believe that Iran had a chance to sign the nuclear deal on short notice and get the sanctions lifted. This would have allowed Iran to occupy the European energy market at a rapid pace and replace Russian gas and oil that were pushed by sanctions. The potential for economic growth was huge, but the radical regime decided to take the path of further escalation with the West and rapprochement with Russia. Some of the experts have noted that the Iranian elites were split over this, but the conservatives won in the end. Some believe that Iran's current position is aimed at pushing the nuclear deal through intimidation and pressure on Western countries. In conclusion, Iran supports Russia because of its anti-American policy. It wants to find allies and escape its isolation, make a profit from selling drones, as well as test its weapons on the battlefield. The country had an opportunity to change its course, but the government chose confrontation over collaboration. This video was made possible thanks to our sponsors on Patreon, Boosty, and YouTube. If you like our content, please consider supporting us.